This is the beginning of podcast number 12 on chapters 8 and 9. We were talking about the learning environment having two different essential components, the managerial component and the instructional component. Students need to know exactly what is expected of them, and being proactive as a teacher is important to prevent discipline problems. The managerial component, which we're going to talk about right now, helps classes to run more smoothly. It minimizes distractions. It is necessary but not sufficient condition for student learning. It involves the creation and maintenance of the learning environment. We want to develop protocols which, of course, minimize distractions, and we need to establish rules and expectations that reflect a positive environment. When many students are not behaving or following your class rules, you need to look at your own teaching behavior, your lesson plans, your organization, and see if you're providing a lot of times where kids are waiting around and able to get into trouble. Always remember that rules, which you should be posting on the wall of your gymnasium, rules teach students about responsibility, the affective part of what we're trying to teach them. Rules identify the general expectations for behavior and they cover a variety of situations. You don't want to have 21 different rules posted on the gymnasium wall because they'll never remember all of them. It's good to attractively post them on the wall and keep them simple. Try to use a positive focus when you're creating guidelines for class rules. Explain why the rules are necessary. Always state them positively. Keep the number of rules to a minimum. Post the rules in an attractive fashion so they can be seen and read easily. And it's also good to post the rules in both English and in Spanish, especially if you have a high population of Spanish-speaking students. Make sure that the children understand the rules. Design, teach, post, and practice the consequences of breaking the rules, and especially in the beginning, prompt students toward appropriate behavior and reinforce appropriate behavior. It's good to use that positive behavior reinforcement, particularly with younger students. It's also important for a teacher to have a series of consequences when you're dealing with student behavior so that students can take responsibility for their own actions and behavior. The first step for consequences should be a verbal warning. The second step is to ask the child if he or she needs to sit out. The third step usually is to take a timeout, although some schools and classes are not promoting doing a timeout. And then they should be able to re-enter whenever they're ready. And also you do need to talk to the students about what happened to make them sit out. The fourth step is to sit out until a personal plan is made regarding their actions. It's always important to remember that a continually disruptive child takes away our ability as teachers to teach, and it also takes away attention from the other students in the class. The consequences should be non-interruptive. Also remember that timeouts are only effective if the lesson is interesting and fun. If the students don't want to be participating in the lesson, a timeout is going to be a reward for them instead. Establishing gymnasium routines are protocols designed to help the gymnasium run smoothly and efficiently. You can see in this picture here that they've got all of the equipment placed in a hula hoop so that the students know where to find it in between each task. You should establish protocols for entering and leaving the gymnasium, stopping and listening skills, distributing the equipment, getting into partners and groups, and other routines like getting water and dealing with injuries. After getting the equipment, what do they do with it? Okay, wait for directions or hug the ball to your chest until we're ready. Those kinds of things, you've got to make sure that your directions are clear and they're completed all the way to the end until the next thing happens. When you group students in the classes, you need to come up with a creative way of doing it by colors. A lot of times elementary teachers use colors and corners of the gym and things like that. They have different creative ways of doing groupings. Sometimes you just take 1, 2, 3 and put them in a group and tell them where to go. But you never want to group students by having captains pick students. That means that someone's always picked last, and that is not good for student self-esteem. As a summary, routines are procedures for accomplishing specific duties in a class. You haven't yet had to get off to a good start at the beginning of a school year, but these are things that teachers have to think about when they are starting the school year at the beginning. They have to ready the gym, plan the protocols, establish consequences, plan beginning of school activities, particularly ways to learn names of students, communicating with parents, developing strategies for potential problems, monitoring students and how you're going to do that during classes, and trying to create some accountability. In other words, trying to get students to be accountable for their own actions. Communicating with parents can involve sending home a newsletter at least once a month or maybe once a semester with parents to make sure they know what the curriculum is that you're teaching and what your behavior expectations are for the students. Teaching skills for establishing a learning environment are very important. Teachers need to teach the protocols to the students and also teach them about what the consequences are if they don't follow the protocols or the rules. You need to describe and demonstrate the desired behavior. You need to practice the behaviors and provide feedback. For instance, the protocol might be how to pick up the equipment and get it up at the end of a class. You might have to practice doing that with the students so that they'll know what to do. Students learn best when the gymnasium is a predictable place to be. It is not a good practice of teachers to make students afraid of you or having you embarrass them. They don't want you to shout with them or shout at them or whatever, but try to talk to them positively in a normal tone. The instructional component of management provides maximum opportunities to learn when students understand and value the learning goals or the objectives of the lesson, and they have tasks with a definite focus and sometimes a definite goal for them to get to, such as try to do this 10 trials and try to get 7 out of those 10 trials so that you're successful. The content is personal, concrete, and familiar. In other words, you want to provide maximum opportunities so that the content is meaningful. Effective teachers use a variety of practices to keep students on task, focused, and motivated. There are 4 components to the instructional components. The content development, which is informing, extending, refining, and applying the content. The second thing is communication, in other words, keeping it simple, stupid, trying to pinpoint and invite students to demonstrate. The third component is feedback that you give to the students. You want it to be congruent, related to what you ask them to do, and specific, in other words, not just giving them praise, but giving them specific feedback on what they did well. And the fourth component is accommodating differences between individuals. In other words, trying to differentiate your teaching so that you teach by invitation, give the students choice, and try to have intra-task variation, which means that you extend the task for individuals or for the class. This last slide for Chapter 8 is very important about teachers and safety. The major responsibility or the main priority for all physical education teachers is to ensure the safety of the students. Teachers should be held accountable for acting in a responsible and reasonable manner. In other words, we have something called proper duty. The proper duty means that you provide aid after an injury, that you observe and supervise all of the students, that you must be in the gymnasium or on the playground and paying attention to what the students are doing so that they don't get hurt. We also want to make sure that the elements of negligence are not done. We don't want to be negligent in our duty. We don't want to have a breach of duty. We don't want to have a proximity cause, and we don't want to have an injury. In other words, the proximity cause means that the teacher's behavior contributed to an injury that a student might have. We don't want to contribute to their injury. Duty means that it requires teachers to anticipate any foreseeable risks of the activity, and most of the time you'll be able to do that. It is important for every physical education teacher to teach the safety protocols at the beginning of each activity, which is something that we ask you to put on every lesson plan while you're here at Winthrop, because it is so important, and we don't want you to be getting into legal liability problems. So at the beginning of each activity that you teach, every unit that you teach, you need to go over the safety concerns and constantly reinforce them when you're teaching. That's the end of Chapter 8 and the end of podcast number 12.